We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Golden Cage. Jackson Mercer sat in his home office, surrounded by architectural blueprints for the vacation home he'd purchased 3 years ago for his wife, Valerie. The property in the Hamptons had been her dream, a sprawling beachfront mansion with 6 bedrooms, a tennis court, and a private dock. As the head of a successful investment firm, Jackson had the means to make it happen, though it stretched even his considerable resources. The setting sun cast long shadows across his desk as he reviewed the property tax statements. $60,000 due next month. Not insignificant, but manageable. Jackson reached for his phone to text Valerie, who was supposedly visiting her sister in Boston for the weekend. She hadn't answered his calls all day. A notification appeared on his computer screen. A new email from his father, Wallace Mercer, a stern banking executive who had never fully approved of Jackson's marriage to Valerie, a former model 15 years Jackson's junior. The email was brief. Need to discuss financial matters. Call me. Jackson dialed his father's number, expecting another lecture about responsible wealth management. Son, Wallace's gravelly voice came through. There's something you need to know about Valerie. I've been watching her movements with the private investigator I hired after your wedding. I know you didn't want me to, but... Dad, we talked about this, Jackson interrupted, pinching the bridge of his nose. She's not visiting her sister, Jackson, Wallace continued. She's at the Hamptons house with Gregory Winters. Jackson's blood ran cold. Gregory Winters, his childhood friend and business partner. There's more, Wallace said. I discovered something while reviewing your joint accounts. 7 months ago, I set up a trust fund for Valerie. You what? Jackson's grip tightened on the phone. It was meant to be protection for you. The terms stated that the money would only be accessible to her if she remained faithful in your marriage. I wanted leverage to ensure she wouldn't take advantage of you. But Jackson, she somehow changed the terms. The trust now lists her as sole beneficiary, with Gregory as secondary. They've been meeting with lawyers behind your back. Jackson's world tilted on its axis. His father had created a secret trust, and somehow Valerie and Gregory had manipulated it to their advantage. How much? Jackson asked, his voice hollow. $5 million. Initially coming from my estate, but structured to pull from your joint assets upon my death. After ending the call, Jackson poured himself a bourbon and opened his laptop. He accessed the security camera feeds for the Hamptons house. Cameras Valerie didn't know existed. The bedroom feed showed Valerie and Gregory locked in an embrace. Time-stamped footage showed they'd been meeting there for months, always when Jackson was traveling for business. A text message lit up his phone. Gregory, hey man, need your signature on those Westlake contracts ASAP. The betrayal burned through Jackson like acid. His wife and his best friend conspiring not just to cheat, but to steal his wealth. He closed his eyes and felt something break inside him, the last shreds of his trusting nature. When he opened them again, he was a different man. Chapter 2. Paper Trail. Jackson spent the next week in careful observation mode, maintaining a facade of normalcy while secretly gathering intelligence. He hired Naomi Blackwood, a forensic accountant recommended by his father, a woman known for her discretion and ruthless attention to detail. Your wife has been systematically isolating your finances, Naomi explained during their clandestine meeting at a coffee shop 15 miles from Jackson's office. The trust fund was just the beginning. She's been manipulating account access, redirecting investment dividends, and establishing separate credit lines using your joint financial statements as leverage. And Gregory? Jackson asked, his voice steady despite the rage simmering beneath. He's the architect behind it all. His law degree isn't just for show. According to these documents, he's been positioning himself to become executor of your estate in the event of your death. There's also a concerning life insurance policy they took out on you 6 months ago. Jackson nodded, unsurprised. What about their relationship timeline? Naomi slid a folder across the table. Based on hotel receipts, restaurant charges, and flight records, they've been involved for approximately 18 months. Their first documented meeting was at the Rialto Hotel in Chicago during your business trip to Tokyo. 18 months. Jackson had been planning to start a family with Valerie around that time. She had claimed she wasn't ready. There's something else, Naomi added. Your father's involvement is complicated. He did establish the original trust, but the modifications weren't made by your wife or Gregory. The signature on the amendment belongs to your father. Jackson felt his stomach drop. You're saying my father changed the trust himself? To benefit Valerie and Gregory? That's what the evidence suggests, though his motives remain unclear. Jackson thanked Naomi and left the meeting with his mind racing. His own father had betrayed him too. But why? Wallace had always seemed to dislike Valerie. None of it made sense. That evening, when Valerie returned from her sister's visit, Jackson greeted her with a smile and a glass of wine. She kissed him absently on the cheek, her eyes never leaving her phone. "How's Melissa?" he asked casually, referring to her sister. "She's fine. Just dealing with the usual drama," Valerie answered vaguely. "I need to make a quick business trip to Singapore next week," Jackson mentioned. "I'll be gone for about 10 days. Valerie's expression brightened momentarily before she composed herself. "That's too bad. I'll miss you. Will you?" Jackson asked, maintaining his smile. "I thought you might want to spend some time at the Hamptons house while I'm gone. The weather should be perfect." "Maybe," she replied noncommittally. "I might have some photo shoots scheduled." Jackson watched her lie with remarkable ease and felt a strange calm settle over him. "By the way, I transferred another $100,000 to the Hamptons house account for maintenance and property taxes." Now her attention was fully on him. "That's thoughtful of you, honey. You always take such good care of things." Later that night, Jackson sat alone in his office and made a phone call to Fletcher Dawson, an old college roommate who now worked in cybersecurity. "Fletcher, remember when you said you owed me a favor that wouldn't involve paperwork or questions? I'm calling it in." Chapter 3, Fault Lines. A separate investigation into his father's activities revealed an even more disturbing picture. Wallace Mercer, banking titan and paragon of financial propriety, had been systematically undermining his son's marriage and business partnerships for years. Jackson confronted his father at the exclusive Ridgemont Club, where Wallace had standing lunch reservations every Thursday. "Why did you change the trust to benefit Valerie and Gregory?" Jackson demanded quietly after ensuring they wouldn't be overheard. Wallace's expression remained impassive. "I had to see how far they would go. I needed evidence of their true intentions." "So, are you saying this was some kind of test? You dangled $5 million in front of my wife and best friend to see if they would betray me. You wouldn't listen to reason, Jackson. You were blinded by her beauty and his friendship. I had to show you the truth." Jackson leaned forward. "And it didn't occur to you to simply tell me your suspicions? Would you have believed me without proof?" Wallace countered. "You've always been idealistic to a fault. Your mother was the same way before she died, always seeing the best in people until they disappointed her." The mention of his mother, who had died when Jackson was 14, cut deep. "Don't bring her into this." Wallace sighed. "Your wife came to me 6 months into your marriage. She wanted to discuss investment options separate from your joint accounts. That's when I knew what kind of woman she truly was. So instead of warning me, you decided to orchestrate this elaborate scheme, risk millions of dollars, and potentially destroy my life to prove a point. The money was never at risk. The trust documents Gregory and Valerie have are forgeries. The real trust exists, but it's structured differently. They believe they've outsmarted me, but they're walking into a trap of my making." Jackson stared at his father, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. "You've been playing with my life like it's one of your banking ventures, testing returns and calculating risks." "I was protecting you," Wallace insisted. "You'll thank me when this is over." "When what is over, exactly? What endgame did you envision here?" Wallace's eyes hardened. "Exposure. Humiliation. Their removal from your life with minimal financial damage. I've been setting the stage for their downfall since I confirmed their affair." Jackson stood up. "You should have trusted me to handle my own life. Like you trusted your wife? Your best friend?" Wallace scoffed. As Jackson walked away, his father called after him. "Don't let emotion cloud your judgment, son. That's how they took advantage of you in the first place. Jackson didn't respond. His father had always been controlling, but this went beyond anything he could have imagined. 3 betrayals: Valerie, Gregory, and now his own father. Each painful, but each enlightening in its own way. That night, Jackson received a call from Fletcher. "I've completed the task you requested. All communications between Valerie Mercer and Gregory Winters for the past 2 years have been extracted and organized chronologically. I've also implemented the monitoring protocols on all their devices as requested. Thank you. Send everything to my secure server." Done. But, Jackson, are you sure you want to read these? Some things can't be unlearned. Jackson thought about his father's manipulations, his wife's deception, and his friend's betrayal. "I need to see everything, Fletcher. Every word, plan, lie." After hanging up, Jackson received a text from Gregory. "Hey, are we still on for racquetball tomorrow? Also, when are you heading to Singapore? We should grab dinner before you go." Jackson replied, "Looking forward to it. Let's meet at the club at 7. And yes, dinner sounds good. Valerie mentioned she might be heading to the Hamptons while I'm gone. Maybe you could check on the place for me?" Gregory's response came quickly. "Sure thing, buddy. Happy to help." Jackson set down his phone and stared at the wall of family photos in his office. He removed each one containing Valerie or Gregory and placed them in a box. Then he opened his laptop and began to read the extracted messages between his wife and his best friend. Their contempt for him was evident in every exchange. They mocked his trust, his generosity, his love for Valerie. They discussed how to maximize their financial gain from the relationship. They planned their meetings around his business travel. They even speculated about how much longer they would need to maintain the charade before securing enough of his assets to leave. But most damning of all was their discussion of his father's trust fund. They believed they had successfully manipulated Wallace Mercer, not realizing they were pawns in his game. Jackson closed the laptop and made a decision. He would not follow his father's script. He would not be a pawn in anyone's game. Not his father's, not Valerie's, not Gregory's. He would write his own ending to this story. He poured himself another bourbon and began to plan. Chapter 4. The Disappearing Act. The morning of his supposed trip to Singapore, Jackson kissed Valerie goodbye and left with his luggage as planned. His driver, Luis Reyes, a former military intelligence officer who now worked exclusively for Jackson, drove him to the airport. "Change of plans, Luis," Jackson said once they were on the highway. "We're not going to the airport." Luis nodded without question. "Where to, Mr. Mercer?" "The warehouse in Brooklyn first, then the apartment on Mulberry Street." Jackson had purchased the warehouse 6 months earlier as an investment property through one of his subsidiary companies. The apartment had been acquired years ago when he first moved to New York, maintained but in use since he married Valerie and moved into their penthouse. Fletcher met him at the warehouse, which had been converted into a state-of-the-art surveillance hub. Screens displayed live feeds from cameras hidden throughout Jackson's properties, including the Hamptons house and his office at Mercer Investments. "Everything is operational," Fletcher confirmed. "We're recording all feeds and monitoring all communications as requested." Jackson surveyed the setup. "And they can't detect any of this? Not unless they're running military-grade counter-surveillance, which is highly unlikely. The hardware is cutting-edge and the software is custom. They'll never know they're being watched." "Perfect. I'll be staying at the Mulberry apartment for the duration of my Singapore trip. I need complete radio silence on my actual whereabouts." Fletcher hesitated. "Jackson, I've known you since we were 19. I've never seen you like this. Are you sure this is the path you want to take?" Jackson's expression remained impassive. "They made their choices. Now I'm making mine." That evening, as expected, Gregory arrived at the Hamptons house. Jackson watched the security feed as Valerie greeted him at the door, wearing nothing but lingerie and a smile. They didn't waste time with pleasantries before heading upstairs. Jackson turned down the audio. He didn't need to hear their intimacy. He was more interested in their conversations afterward. Did he suspect anything? Gregory asked as they lounged by the pool later that night. Valerie laughed. "Jackson? Not a chance. He transferred another $100,000 to the house account before leaving. Said it was for maintenance and property taxes. As if this place needs that much maintenance." What did I tell you? The guy's completely clueless, Gregory said, pouring more champagne. The trust fund your father-in-law set up is just the beginning. Once we execute the next phase, we'll have access to at least 30% of his liquid assets. And he'll never know until it's too late, Valerie added. I've already started moving my personal items to storage. Another few months, and we can disappear with enough money to last a lifetime. To us, Gregory raised his glass. And to Jackson, the most generous man I've ever robbed. They clinked glasses, laughing. Jackson turned away from the monitors. Send me the recording of that conversation, he instructed Fletcher. And keep monitoring. I want to know everything they discuss about their plans. Over the next week, Jackson watched from his Brooklyn command center as Valerie and Gregory enjoyed his Hamptons house, spent his money, and further detailed their scheme to defraud him. They mentioned other conspirators, a lawyer named Daniel Roth who was helping them create fraudulent documents, and a banker at Jackson's own financial institution who was facilitating unauthorized transfers. Meanwhile, Jackson was executing his own plan. Using the evidence gathered by Fletcher and Naomi, he began systematically securing his assets. He quietly transferred funds from joint accounts to new ones that Valerie couldn't access. He revoked permissions, changed passwords, and restructured his business holdings to protect them from Gregory's machinations. He also contacted Bennett Wade, a private investigator with a reputation for discretion and tenacity. I need everything you can find on these individuals, Jackson said, sliding a folder across the desk in Bennett's sparse office. Financial records, personal history, vulnerabilities, secrets, anything that could be leveraged. Bennett scanned the list. Gregory Winters, Valerie Mercer, Daniel Roth, and Thomas Kelly, the banker. This will take time, and it won't be cheap. Money isn't an issue. Results are. Bennett studied Jackson's face. These names, they're connected to you personally. This isn't just business intelligence. Does that pose a problem? Jackson's tone was neutral. Not for me. But revenge is a complicated business, Mr. Mercer. It tends to leave marks on everyone involved, including the ones seeking it. Jackson stood to leave. I'm already marked, Mr. Wade. I'm just making sure I'm not the only one. Chapter 5. The Spider's Web. Jackson's preparation phase lasted 3 weeks. During that time, Valerie reported speaking to him regularly via video calls from Singapore, which were actually deepfake videos created by Fletcher's team, allowing Jackson to maintain the illusion of his absence while gathering more evidence and implementing his plan. Bennett Wade's investigation yielded valuable intelligence. Gregory had a gambling problem he kept carefully hidden, with significant debts to some dangerous people. Daniel Roth, the lawyer, had been disbarred in Connecticut for ethical violations before re-establishing himself in New York under suspicious circumstances. Thomas Kelly, the banker, was having an affair with his supervisor's wife and had a history of financial impropriety that had been covered up by his institution. And Valerie, she had secrets even Gregory didn't know. Before meeting Jackson, she had been involved with a wealthy developer named Anthony Morgan who died under mysterious circumstances, leaving her a substantial inheritance that she had hidden from Jackson during their prenuptial negotiations. Jackson absorbed all this information methodically, fitting each piece into his evolving strategy. He was no longer driven by emotion, but by a cold determination to dismantle the conspiracy against him and ensure that everyone involved paid an appropriate price. His father called repeatedly, but Jackson ignored the calls. He wasn't ready to deal with Wallace's manipulations yet. On the day before his scheduled return from Singapore, Jackson put the next phase of his plan into motion. He contacted Olivia Chun, an old flame who now worked as a federal prosecutor specializing in financial crimes. I need to report potential fraud, but I want to do it carefully, Jackson explained during their meeting in a quiet corner of a downtown restaurant. Olivia's expression remained professional despite their history. What kind of fraud are we talking about? Banking, wire, securities, conspiracy. Take your pick, Jackson said, sliding a USB drive across the table. This contains evidence implicating several individuals in a scheme to defraud me personally and my company shareholders. I'm providing it to you because I trust your discretion and your commitment to justice. Olivia pocketed the drive without examining it. Why not go through normal channels? Because one of the conspirators is my wife, another is my business partner, and a third works at the bank that handles both my personal and business accounts. This needs to be handled surgically. I'll review the evidence, Olivia promised. But Jackson, I need to be clear. If there's substantive evidence of crimes here, I will pursue it regardless of your personal feelings or any potential blowback to you. That's exactly what I'm counting on, Jackson assured her. His next stop was the office of Raymond Yee, a brilliant but eccentric tax attorney known for his ability to navigate complex financial structures. I need to revoke a trust established by my father that benefits my wife, Jackson explained. But I want to do it in a way that appears to leave it intact, while actually rendering it worthless. Raymond pushed his round glasses up his nose. Interesting challenge. Can I assume this is urgent, but needs to remain confidential? Extremely so, on both counts. Give me the details in 48 hours. I'll create a solution that will satisfy both requirements. The final piece fell into place when Jackson visited Diane Mercer, his stepmother. Diane had married Wallace 5 years after Jackson's mother died, and their relationship had always been cordial but distant. I need to understand something about my father, Jackson said as they sat in her garden. Has he always played these manipulation games? Using people as pawns? Diane studied him sadly. Your father believes he's protecting the people he loves by controlling them. It's why I left him 3 years ago. Jackson looked up in surprise. You left? But you're still married. On paper, we maintain appearances for his business associates and social circle, but we haven't lived as husband and wife since I discovered he was having me followed by private investigators. Your father trusts no one, Jackson, not even those closest to him. Why didn't you tell me? Diane sighed. Wallace convinced me it would hurt your perception of family stability. He's very persuasive when he wants to be. Jackson absorbed this new information about his father. Another layer of deception in a situation already thick with lies. There's something else you should know, Diane added. Your father has been ill. His heart condition has worsened significantly in the past year. The doctors have given him perhaps 6 months. He hasn't told you because he doesn't want it to affect your business decisions. Jackson felt a confusing mix of anger and sorrow. His father was dying, yet still manipulating everyone around him. It explained Wallace's sudden interest in protecting Jackson's assets through the trust fund scheme, but it didn't excuse his methods. Thank you for your honesty, Diane. It's refreshing to encounter in my family. Before leaving, Jackson asked one more question. Did my father ever mention concerns about Valerie or Gregory to you? Diane's expression turned grave. He did more than mention concerns. He showed me evidence, photographs, financial records. Jackson, I think there's something you need to see. She retrieved a locked box from her closet and handed Jackson a key. Your father gave me this for safekeeping several months ago. He said if anything happened to him, I should give it to you, but only if you came asking the right questions. I think this qualifies. Inside the box, Jackson found documentation of a life insurance policy taken out on him by Gregory Winters, with Valerie as the beneficiary. The policy was for $20 million and included double indemnity for accidental death. There were also medical reports, Jackson's medical reports, which should have been confidential, showing he had been prescribed sleeping medication during a period of insomnia the previous year. Attached was a toxicology analysis suggesting that sustained overuse of the medication combined with alcohol could cause symptoms mimicking heart failure. Jackson felt a chill run through him. The conspiracy against him wasn't just about stealing his money. It might actually be about ending his life. Chapter 6. The Trap Springs. Jackson returned to his penthouse on the scheduled day of his arrival from Singapore, greeted by a seemingly delighted Valerie who had rushed back from the Hamptons' house the night before. She had prepared his favorite meal and wore the blue dress he had complimented on their anniversary. I missed you so much, she cooed, wrapping her arms around him. How was your trip? Productive, Jackson replied, returning her embrace with well-practiced warmth. How was your time while I was away? Did you enjoy the Hamptons? Oh, I only went up for a couple of days, she lied smoothly. Mostly I was busy with charity committee meetings and catching up with Melissa. Jackson nodded, marveling at her ability to fabricate reality without a flicker of hesitation. "Well, I'm glad you kept busy. Any messages for me while I was gone?" "Nothing important," she assured him, "though your father called several times. Said it was urgent, but wouldn't tell me what it was about." "I'll call him tomorrow," Jackson said dismissively. "Tonight, I just want to relax with my beautiful wife." They ate dinner together, making small talk about his fictional meetings in Singapore and her fictional charity work. Jackson watched her perform the role of devoted wife with the skill of a seasoned actress. He matched her performance with one of his own, the trusting, oblivious husband. After dinner, Valerie received a text that made her frown briefly before composing her features. "Darling, I completely forgot I promised to help Melissa with a design emergency tonight. Would you mind terribly if I stepped out for a couple of hours? I know you just got back, but she's absolutely desperate." "Of course not," Jackson said magnanimously. "Family comes first. Give Melissa my best." The moment Valerie left the penthouse, Jackson activated the tracking app Fletcher had installed on her phone. As expected, she wasn't heading to her sister's place, but to a boutique hotel in Tribeca where Gregory was staying. Jackson poured himself a drink and called Fletcher. "It's time. Activate Phase 2. Within minutes, the dedicated phone he used for his plan rang. It was Raymond Yee, the tax attorney. "It's done, Mr. Mercer. The trust has been legally restructured. From the outside, nothing appears to have changed, but the new terms render it essentially worthless to the beneficiaries. Additionally, I've included a trigger clause as you requested. Any attempt to access or modify the trust will automatically initiate a full forensic audit." "Excellent work, Raymond. The second payment will be in your account by morning." His next call was to Olivia Chun. "Have you reviewed the evidence?" "I have," she confirmed, her voice professional. "There's more than enough here to justify opening a formal investigation. I've already spoken with agents from the Financial Crimes Division. They'll be serving warrants within 48 hours. "Thank you, Olivia. I appreciate your thoroughness. This isn't a favor, Jackson. It's my job, and for what it's worth, I'm sorry you're going through this." After ending the call, Jackson contacted Bennett Wade. "I need surveillance on the Tribeca Grand Hotel, room 712. Send me live updates." While waiting for Bennett's team to position themselves, Jackson received an unexpected visitor. His father, Wallace Mercer, entered the penthouse using his emergency key. "We need to talk," Wallace announced without preamble. "You've been avoiding my calls." Jackson gestured to a chair. "I've been busy undoing your handiwork." Wallace sat down heavily, looking older and more worn than Jackson had ever seen him. "You found the box Diane kept for me." "I did. Were you ever going to tell me that my wife and best friend might be planning to kill me? Or was that something else you thought I needed to discover on my own?" Wallace sighed deeply. "I was going to tell you when I had concrete proof. The life insurance policy was suspicious, and the medical reports concerning, but not definitive evidence of homicidal intent. So you were waiting for them to actually attempt to murder me before warning me?" Jackson's voice remained calm despite the absurdity of his father's position. "Of course not. I was building a case that you couldn't dismiss. You have a tendency to reject my concerns until they're impossible to ignore." Jackson studied his father's face, noting the pallor and fatigue that confirmed Diane's revelation about his health. "Diane told me about your condition." 6 months, she said. Wallace waved dismissively. "Doctors exaggerate. I have arrangements in place." "I'm sure you do. Control until the very end, right?" "Someone has to maintain order," Wallace replied without irony. "Speaking of which, what exactly have you been doing these past 3 weeks? My sources tell me you never went to Singapore." Jackson smiled thinly. "I've been taking your advice for once, not letting emotion cloud my judgment. I've been meticulous, thorough, and several steps ahead of my opponents. I believe that's the Mercer way, isn't it?" Before Wallace could respond, Jackson's phone buzzed with an update from Bennett. A series of photos showed Valerie and Gregory in an intense conversation in the hotel room, clearly arguing. The final image showed Gregory handing Valerie a small vial. Jackson showed the photos to his father. "It seems your suspicions about their intentions might be correct after all." Wallace's expression hardened. "What are you going to do?" "I've already done it. By this time tomorrow, Gregory will be under federal investigation for financial crimes. The banker and lawyer who assisted them will be facing similar charges. Valerie's secret inheritance from her mysteriously deceased former lover will be exposed to scrutiny, and the trust fund you created will be revealed as worthless. And Valerie? What about the vial? Jackson stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Valerie is coming home tonight to a husband who will welcome her with a glass of her favorite wine. A husband who has evidence of everything she's done but will pretend to know nothing. A husband who will watch very carefully what she does with that glass of wine. Wallace looked troubled. You're using yourself as bait? That's unnecessarily risky. I learned from the best, Dad. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to achieve your objectives. Before leaving, Wallace placed a hand on Jackson's shoulder, an unusual display of physical affection from the normally reserved banker. Be careful, son. Don't underestimate what desperate people will do. I won't, Jackson promised. And Dad, when this is over, we need to have a long conversation about boundaries and trust. Wallace nodded sadly. Perhaps we do. After his father left, Jackson received a text from Valerie. Sorry, darling. Melissa's crisis is taking longer than expected. Don't wait up for me. Jackson replied. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you get back. Then he began making final preparations for Valerie's return. He set up hidden cameras in their bedroom and kitchen, ensuring that every angle was covered. He placed 2 wine glasses on the counter alongside Valerie's favorite Cabernet Sauvignon. And he waited. Chapter 7. Checkmate. Valerie returned to the penthouse just after midnight, her expression carefully composed but her eyes darting nervously as she greeted Jackson. Melissa finally get her design emergency sorted? Jackson asked casually, offering her a glass of wine. Yes, thankfully, Valerie smiled, accepting the glass but not drinking. It was an absolute nightmare, with the client changing their mind at the last minute. You know how it is. Jackson nodded, taking a sip of his own wine. All too well. Business is similar, constantly managing expectations and adapting to changing circumstances. He watched as Valerie discreetly checked her purse, where he presumed she had placed the vial Gregory had given her. She seemed to be waiting for an opportunity. I was thinking, Jackson continued, moving to sit on the couch. Now that the Singapore deal is settled, we should plan a proper vacation. Just the 2 of us. Maybe the Maldives? We've talked about going there for years. Valerie perched beside him, still holding her untouched wine. That sounds wonderful. When were you thinking? How about next month? I can clear my schedule. Perfect, she agreed with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, I almost forgot. I picked up your sleeping pills prescription while you were away. The pharmacy called saying it was ready. Jackson maintained a neutral expression. That was thoughtful of you. I didn't realize I was running low. You mentioned it before your trip, she lied. You know how you get with jet lag. I figured you might need them tonight. I might, Jackson agreed. Would you mind getting them for me? I'm feeling the time difference already. Valerie set down her wine glass and went to her purse, returning with a prescription bottle that Jackson immediately recognized as not being from his usual pharmacy. She handed him 2 pills. The pharmacist said, these are a new formulation. Stronger, faster acting. Jackson palmed the pills. Thank you. I think I'll finish my wine first, though. Join me. He gestured to her untouched glass. Valerie hesitated before picking it up and taking a small sip. To us, Jackson said, raising his glass. And to new beginnings. Something in his tone must have alerted her because Valerie's eyes narrowed slightly. New beginnings? Jackson nodded. I've been doing a lot of thinking during my trip. About life, priorities, trust. He set down his glass and looked directly at her. It's funny how clear things become when you step away from your usual environment. Patterns emerge. Inconsistencies stand out. Valerie shifted uncomfortably. What kind of inconsistencies? Instead of answering, Jackson placed the pill she had given him on the coffee table. These are my prescription, Valerie. In fact, they're not sleeping pills at all, are they? Color drained from her face. Of course they are. What are you talking about? No, Jackson said calmly. They're a combination of medications that, when mixed with alcohol, cause symptoms similar to cardiac arrest. particularly in someone with a family history of heart problems like mine. Gregory acquired them through his connection with Dr. Levine at the University Research Hospital. They've been communicating about it for weeks. Valerie stood abruptly, knocking over her wine glass. You're not making any sense, Jackson. You sound paranoid. Jackson remained seated, his posture relaxed despite the tension crackling between them. Do I? Let's see. You and Gregory have been having an affair for 18 months. You've been systematically isolating my finances to prepare for eventual theft. You manipulated my father's trust fund, or at least you thought you did. And now you're attempting to murder me to collect on a $20 million life insurance policy Gregory took out of my name. Valerie's expression shifted from feigned confusion to cold calculation. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can prove all of it, Jackson countered, picking up a remote and turning on the television. The screen displayed footage of Valerie and Gregory in the Hamptons' house, discussing their plans in explicit detail. I have hundreds of hours of recordings like this, plus all your text messages, emails, and phone conversations for the past 2 years. Valerie's face hardened. You've been spying on me? That's illegal. Not when it's my property being used for a criminal conspiracy. But that's hardly your biggest concern right now. What do you want? Valerie demanded, her pretense of innocence completely abandoned. Money? Is that it? Name your price. Jackson laughed without humor. I don't want your money, Valerie. I want justice. And as we speak, it's being served to your co-conspirators. Gregory was arrested an hour ago by federal agents. The lawyer and banker who helped you will be in custody by morning. And investigators are taking a fresh look at Anthony Morgan's death, your previous benefactor whose mysterious heart attack left you a wealthy woman. Valerie paled further at the mention of Anthony Morgan. You don't understand what happened with Anthony. I understand perfectly, Jackson interrupted. And now, so do the authorities. Valerie's demeanor changed instantly. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. This is ridiculous. I'm leaving. That will be unwise, Jackson warned. There are federal agents waiting in the lobby. They have questions about your role in the conspiracy. I've provided them with evidence, but they're particularly interested in that vial in your purse. Valerie froze, her hand on the doorknob. You're bluffing. Am I? Jackson held up his phone, showing a live security feed of the lobby where 2 suited individuals waited near the elevators. Special Agents Morales and Washington. They've been very thorough in reviewing the evidence I provided. Valerie's composure cracked completely. She turned back to Jackson, her expression now desperate. You don't understand. Gregory pressured me into this. He said if I didn't help him, he would release compromising photos of me. I was being blackmailed. Interesting defense strategy, Jackson commented. Unfortunately, it contradicts the hundreds of recordings where you were clearly the driving force behind many of the schemes, including tonight's murder attempt. Tears filled Valerie's eyes. Whether genuine or tactical, Jackson couldn't tell. Jackson, please. We can work this out. I made a terrible mistake, but I still care for you. We could start over. The time for that is long past, Jackson said, rising from the couch. You have 2 options now. You can leave through that door and face immediate arrest and public scandal. Or you can take option 2. What's option 2? Valerie asked cautiously. Jackson retrieved an envelope from his desk and handed it to her. Inside are divorce papers already signed by me. The terms are simple. You relinquish all claims to my assets and businesses. You sign a comprehensive NDA about our marriage and its dissolution. In exchange, you receive a one-time payment of $500,000 and no criminal charges from me personally. $500,000? Valerie scoffed. That's insulting after what I could have had. It's significantly better than a prison cell, Jackson pointed out. But make no mistake, this deal only covers the charges I could bring. The federal investigation into financial crimes and Anthony Morgan's death will proceed regardless of what you decide. Valerie stared at the envelope, weighing her options. How do I know you'll keep your word? Unlike you and Gregory, I don't break promises, Jackson said coldly. The money will be transferred to an account in your name the moment I receive confirmation that the papers have been properly filed. After a long moment, Valerie took the envelope and removed the papers. "Do you have a pen?" Jackson provided one, watching as she signed each marked page without reading the details. Her hands trembled slightly, but her signature remained clear and legible. "A wise choice," Jackson commented as she handed back the signed documents. "Luis will drive you to a hotel of your choosing tonight. I suggest you use the time to plan your defense strategy for the federal investigation. And Valerie, don't attempt to contact me again. Ever." As Valerie gathered her belongings, she paused at the door. "You know, I did love you once. In the beginning." Jackson's expression remained impassive. "No, you didn't. You loved what I represented, security, status, wealth. But you never loved me. If you had, none of this would have happened." After she left, Jackson contacted his security team to confirm she had departed the building, then called Olivia Chun. "It's done," he informed her. "Valerie signed the divorce papers and has left the penthouse. Gregory is in custody." "Yes," Olivia confirmed. "He's already offering to cooperate in exchange for leniency." Typical when these types of conspiracies unravel. Everyone starts throwing each other under the bus. What about Thomas Kelly and Daniel Roth? Kelly was arrested at his home an hour ago. Roth apparently got wind of what was happening and tried to flee, but he was apprehended at Newark Airport. And the Anthony Morgan investigation? The case has been officially reopened. Based on the evidence you provided in Gregory's initial statements, there's strong reason to believe Morgan's death wasn't from natural causes. Jackson thanked her for the update and ended the call, feeling a strange emptiness despite the successful execution of his plan. Victory tasted hollow in the face of such profound betrayal. Chapter 8. Family Legacy. 3 days after Valerie's departure, Jackson received an urgent call from Diane. His father had collapsed and been rushed to the hospital. Despite their complicated relationship, Jackson immediately went to be at Wallace's bedside. The cardiac unit at New York Presbyterian was quiet when Jackson arrived. Diane sat in a chair by Wallace's bed, holding his hand as machines monitored his vital signs. "The doctors say it was a major heart attack," Diane explained softly. "They've stabilized him, but his heart was already compromised." Jackson finished when she trailed off. "How long?" "Days, maybe a week. They can't be certain." Jackson studied his father's face, noticing how vulnerable the powerful banker looked in a hospital gown, connected to machines that kept him alive. Despite everything, there was still a deep connection between them, complex, flawed, but undeniably present. "Would you mind giving us a few minutes?" Jackson asked Diane, who nodded and stepped out of the room. When they were alone, Jackson sat in the chair Diane had vacated. "I know you're awake, Dad. The nurse mentioned you've been drifting in and out of consciousness." Wallace's eyes opened slightly. Always observant, he managed his voice barely audible. "I learned from you," Jackson acknowledged. "For better or worse." Wallace's fingers twitched, seeking his son's hand. Jackson hesitated before taking it. "You were right," Wallace whispered. "Should have trusted you." "Yes, you should have," Jackson agreed. "But I understand why you didn't. You've spent your life controlling variables, minimizing risks. It's who you are. Tried to protect you. I know. But protection without trust isn't protection at all. It's just another form of control." Wallace's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "Your mother would be disappointed in what I've become." The mention of his mother struck Jackson deeply. "Maybe. Or maybe she would understand that you did the best you could with the tools you had." "The trust fund," Wallace began, "is taken care of," Jackson assured him. "Raymond Yee helped me restructure it properly. The money will go to the foundation Mom started for music education in public schools. It seems fitting." A ghost of a smile appeared on Wallace's lips. "She would like that." They sat in silence for a moment, the beeping of machines marking the passage of time. "Gregory and Valerie?" Wallace finally asked. "Facing consequences," Jackson replied simply. "As we all do eventually." Wallace's grip on Jackson's hand tightened slightly. "I'm sorry for interfering, for not believing in you." "I know, Dad. Rest now. We can talk more when you're stronger." But they both knew there wouldn't be more conversations. Wallace's condition deteriorated rapidly over the next 2 days, and he died peacefully with Jackson and Diane at his side. Despite their complicated history, Jackson felt a profound sense of loss, not just for the father he had, but for the relationship they might have had if trust had been its foundation instead of control. The funeral was a somber affair, attended by New York's financial elite and political figures who had worked with Wallace over his long career. Jackson delivered a eulogy that honored his father's strengths while acknowledging his complexities, a true portrait rather than an idealized one. After the service, as attendees gathered for the reception, Jackson noticed a familiar face among the crowd. Naomi Blackwood, the forensic accountant who had helped uncover Valerie and Gregory's scheme. "I didn't expect to see you here," Jackson commented as she approached. "I came to pay my respects," Naomi explained. "Your father was a significant figure in financial circles, regardless of his personal failings." Jackson nodded, appreciating her straightforward approach. "Have you been following the aftermath of our project?" "I have," Naomi confirmed, lowering her voice. "Gregory Winters is cooperating fully with prosecutors. He's implicated Valerie in both the financial crimes and Anthony Morgan's death. There's strong evidence she administered the same combination of drugs to Morgan that she attempted to use on you." And Thomas Kelly and Daniel Roth. Kelly accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony. Roth is fighting the charges, but his position looks increasingly untenable. The bank is conducting an internal investigation that's uncovering additional improprieties. Jackson absorbed this information with a sense of grim satisfaction. Justice was unfolding as he had planned, though the process would take months or even years to fully conclude. "What will you do now?" Naomi asked. "With your father gone and your marriage over?" It was a question Jackson had been asking himself since Wallace's death. His carefully constructed life had been systematically dismantled, some parts by his own hand, others by betrayal. What remained was a blank canvas. "I'm considering a significant restructuring of Mercer Investments," he told her, "moving away from traditional finance towards sustainable development and social impact investing. My mother always believed wealth carried responsibility. I think it's time I honored that belief more explicitly." Naomi studied him with professional interest. "That's a major pivot for a firm with your history. The board might resist." "They might," Jackson acknowledged. "But as my father's primary heir, I now control a majority of voting shares. Change is coming, whether they embrace it or not." After the funeral, Jackson retreated to a remote property in the Berkshires that had belonged to his mother's family. The rustic cabin, situated on a quiet lake, had been his refuge during difficult periods throughout his life. Now, surrounded by nature and solitude, he began the process of rebuilding, not just his business empire, but his sense of self. Chapter 9. New Foundations. 6 months after Wallace Mercer's funeral, the legal proceedings against Gregory, Valerie, and their associates were still ongoing, but Jackson had moved forward with his life in unexpected ways. Mercer Investments had undergone a dramatic transformation, rebranding as Mercer Impact Capital with a new focus on funding sustainable technologies, affordable housing initiatives, and educational programs in underserved communities. The transition hadn't been smooth. Several board members had resigned in protest, and some longtime clients had withdrawn their investments. But the firm had attracted new partners who shared Jackson's revised vision. The Hamptons house had been sold, the proceeds donated to organizations supporting victims of financial fraud. Jackson had moved from the penthouse to a more modest but still elegant brownstone in Brooklyn, where he had established a different rhythm to his life, less focused on acquisition and status, more centered on purpose and connection. On a crisp October morning, Jackson met with Olivia Chun at a small cafe near the federal courthouse. She had just come from a hearing in the case against Gregory Winters. He accepted the plea deal, Olivia informed him. 15 years with possibility of parole after 10, in exchange for comprehensive testimony against Valerie regarding Anthony Morgan's death. Jackson nodded, feeling neither joy nor vindication, just a quiet sense that justice was being served. And Valerie? Her trial begins next month. With Gregory's testimony and the evidence recovered from her previous relationship with Morgan, the prosecution has a strong case for first-degree murder. She'll likely spend the rest of her life in prison. What about the property taxes? Jackson asked unexpectedly. Olivia looked confused. Property taxes? For the Hamptons' house, Jackson clarified. Gregory texted me about them being due right before everything unraveled. It was such a small thing. No greeting, no personal connection, just a demand for money. That's when I knew for certain what kind of relationship we truly had. Olivia smiled slightly. Sometimes it's the small revelations that provide the most clarity. What did you tell him? I wrote back. I'm aware of the taxes. I'm also aware of everything else. He never responded. Jackson sipped his coffee reflectively. It's strange how a simple exchange like that can mark the end of a decades-long friendship. Had you been in contact with any of them since the arrests? Jackson shook his head. No, that chapter is closed permanently. After meeting with Olivia, Jackson walked to a nearby park where he had arranged to meet Naomi Blackwood. Their professional relationship had gradually evolved into something more personal over the months following Wallace's death. Jackson had been resistant at first, wary of trust and vulnerability after his experience with Valerie. But Naomi's straightforward nature and uncompromising integrity had slowly broken through his defenses. She was waiting on a bench near the fountain, reviewing documents as always. Jackson smiled at the sight. Naomi was nothing if not consistent in her dedication to detail. Good news or bad? He asked, gesturing to the papers as he sat beside her. Interesting, she replied, her standard answer for anything that captured her analytical mind. The forensic audit of your father's banking activities revealed something unexpected. It seems he made substantial anonymous donations to several children's hospitals and medical research facilities specializing in pediatric cardiac care. Jackson raised an eyebrow in surprise. That doesn't sound like my father. He was strategic with his philanthropy, always with recognition and networking opportunities attached. These were different, Naomi explained. Completely anonymous, started shortly after your mother's death, and continuing until his own. The total over the years amounts to nearly $30 million. Jackson was stunned. His father, the calculating banker who measured everything in terms of return on investment, had been secretly supporting causes with no personal benefit attached. There's more, Naomi continued. I found correspondence between your father and a Dr. Eleanor Wilson at Cornell Medical. Apparently, your mother died of a congenital heart condition that can be hereditary. Wallace had been funding research specifically focused on early detection and treatment of this condition. He never told me, Jackson said quietly. Not about the donations or about the hereditary nature of Mom's condition. There's a letter addressed to you in his private files. It was never sent. Naomi handed him an envelope, yellowed with age. Diane found it when clearing out his study and asked me to give it to you. Jackson opened the envelope carefully, unfolding a letter dated 15 years earlier, soon after his mother's death. Jackson, there are things a father should tell his son, but I find myself unable to speak them aloud. Your mother's death has left a void in both our lives that I don't know how to fill. She was my compass, my heart. Without her, I am navigating in darkness. The doctors tell me the condition that took her could be hereditary. The thought of losing you to the same fate is unbearable. I've arranged for monitoring and research, though I haven't told you because I know how you would resist what you perceive as interference. Perhaps this is wrong of me, but protection sometimes requires difficult choices. I cannot be the father she would want me to be, warm, expressive, trusting. Those qualities died with her. But I can ensure you are safe, successful, protected. It's all I know how to offer. Perhaps someday I'll find the courage to give you this letter. Until then, know that every action I take, however misguided it may seem, comes from a place of love, imperfect and flawed, but genuine. Your father. Jackson folded the letter carefully and returned it to the envelope, his hands trembling slightly. The glimpse into his father's inner thoughts didn't excuse the manipulation and control that had defined their relationship, but it offered context, a broken man trying to protect his son in the only way he knew how. Are you okay? Naomi asked, her usual professional detachment softening with concern. I will be, Jackson assured her. It's just complicated to reconcile the father I knew with the man who wrote this. who donated millions anonymously to honor my mother. Naomi nodded. People rarely fit into the neat categories we assign them. Even those who hurt us most deeply can have moments of genuine love and sacrifice. The irony is, if he had just told me about the hereditary condition, if he had trusted me with the truth instead of maneuvering behind the scenes, so much pain might have been avoided. Perhaps, Naomi acknowledged. But we can't rewrite the past. We can only learn from it and move forward. Jackson took her hand, a gesture that still felt new but increasingly natural. Speaking of moving forward, have you considered my proposal about joining Mercer Impact Capital? We could use someone with your skills on the due diligence team. Naomi's expression turned thoughtful. I've been independent for a long time, Jackson. Working within a corporate structure, even one as progressive as yours is becoming, would be an adjustment. Think of it as a partnership rather than employment, Jackson suggested. You maintain your autonomy while having resources and infrastructure to expand your impact. A partnership, Naomi repeated, considering the word in all its potential meanings. I could be open to that concept, professionally speaking. Jackson smiled, hearing the unspoken acknowledgement of their evolving personal relationship. That's all I'm asking for now. A willingness to explore possibilities. As they walked through the park, discussing the details of how such a professional arrangement might work, Jackson felt a sense of cautious optimism that had been absent from his life for too long. The betrayals he had experienced hadn't broken him. They had transformed him, stripping away illusions and leaving a clearer vision of what truly mattered. Later that afternoon, Jackson visited the small music school in Harlem that had been one of his mother's passion projects. The Wallace and Elizabeth Mercer Foundation, restructured after his father's death, had recently provided funding to expand its facilities and scholarship programs. As he watched children practicing in the new rehearsal spaces, Jackson thought about the property taxes that had triggered his awakening to Gregory and Valerie's true nature. Such a mundane detail, yet it had set in motion events that completely reshaped his life. The cold, transactional nature of that text message had crystallized for Jackson everything that was wrong with those relationships. His phone buzzed with a message from Naomi. Reviewed partnership proposal. Let's discuss details over dinner tomorrow. I have suggestions. Jackson smiled, appreciating her directness and the absence of pretense or manipulation. He typed a reply, looking forward to your thoughts. 7 p.m. at that Ethiopian place you mentioned. Her response came quickly. Perfect. Don't be late. Simple, honest communication. No hidden agendas. No performance of emotion. Just authentic connection. After the elaborate deceptions he had uncovered and dismantled, its value was immeasurable. Jackson put away his phone and continued his tour of the music school, stopping to listen as a young girl played a hauntingly beautiful piece on the violin. The instructor explained it was a composition by Elizabeth Mercer, Jackson's mother, that had recently been discovered among Wallace's papers after his death. As the notes filled the room, Jackson closed his eyes and allowed himself to feel the full spectrum of his journey. The pain of betrayal, the cold satisfaction of justice served, the lingering complexity of his relationship with his father, and the tentative hope of new beginnings with Naomi and his reimagined company. The property taxes were paid. The accounts settled. The debt of false relationships cleared. What remained was the opportunity to build something authentic on the clear ground, a life defined not by what had been lost, but by what could now be created. Epilogue. 15 years later. Jackson Mercer stood on the expansive stone terrace of his upstate New York estate, watching a late summer thunderstorm roll across the distant mountains. At 53, his hair had streaks of distinguished silver at the temples, and fine lines marked the corners of his eyes, evidence of both laughter and hardship etched into his features. The past 15 years had transformed him in ways he could never have anticipated on that fateful evening when he discovered his wife's betrayal and began dismantling the conspiracy against him. He sipped his bourbon, savoring the complex notes as lightning illuminated the valley below. The property was a far cry from the ostentatious Hamptons mansion he had once maintained for Valerie. This place, 300 acres of forests, meadows, and a pristine lake, felt like home in a way no other residence ever had. The main house was substantial but understated, built from local stone and timber, designed to complement rather than dominate the landscape. "There you are," came Naomi's voice from behind him. "I wonder where you disappeared to." Jackson turned to see his wife of 12 years approaching, a tablet in hand, her practical sensibility evident even in the way she carried herself during leisure hours. Naomi's analytical mind and uncompromising integrity had been his salvation during the darkest period of his life. Now they were the foundation of both their marriage and their professional partnership. "Just watching the storm," he replied, extending his arm. She stepped into his embrace, leaning against him as they observed the distant weather together. "The Ferguson proposal came through," she told him, showing him the screen. "They've agreed to our terms for the affordable housing development in Detroit." Jackson nodded with satisfaction. "That's 3 major projects secured this month. The team is performing exceptionally well." Mercer Impact Capital had evolved into one of the most respected social investment firms in the country, with offices in New York, Chicago, and San Francisco. Their focus on sustainable development, educational initiatives, and community revitalization had generated both impressive financial returns and measurable social benefits. The transformation Jackson had begun after his father's death had been completed and expanded beyond his initial vision. "Have you heard from Diane today?" Naomi asked, setting the tablet aside. "Yes, she called this morning. The Elizabeth Mercer Music Academy's 20th anniversary gala raised over $12 million. She was particularly pleased that 3 of their graduates performed at Carnegie Hall last week." Jackson's stepmother, Diane, had become a close ally and friend in the years following Wallace's death. She now served as the chairperson of the foundation that bore his parents' names, focusing particularly on the music education programs that had been his mother's passion. "And how are you feeling about tomorrow?" Naomi asked carefully, studying his expression. Tomorrow marked the release of Gregory Winters from federal prison after serving 15 years for his crimes. Jackson had received notification from Olivia Chun, who had risen to become the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, but still kept Jackson informed about matters related to his case. "I'm fine," Jackson assured her, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. "Gregory's release doesn't change anything. That chapter of my life has been closed for a long time." Naomi didn't press the issue, but her slight frown indicated she wasn't convinced. After 12 years of marriage, she could read him better than anyone ever had. "Dad, Dad," came an excited voice from the house. Their 10-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, named for Jackson's mother, burst onto the terrace, her dark hair wild and her eyes bright with excitement. "The weather alert says we might lose power. Can we get the emergency lanterns ready? And tell ghost stories if it goes out." Jackson smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm for potential disaster scenarios. She had inherited Naomi's analytical mind and preparation instincts, always ready with a plan for any contingency. "Absolutely," he agreed. "Why don't you go check if the lanterns need new batteries? I'll be in to help in a minute." As Elizabeth dashed back inside, their 13-year-old son, William, appeared in the doorway with a more measured approach. "The backup generator is already on standby," he reported with the seriousness of someone tasked with vital responsibilities. "And I've made sure all devices are charged." "Excellent work," Jackson acknowledged. William had his father's quiet intensity and sense of responsibility, though Jackson had worked diligently to ensure his son also possessed the emotional openness that Wallace Mercer had never managed to demonstrate. The children retreated inside as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Naomi squeezed Jackson's hand. "I need to finish reviewing the Ferguson documents before a call tomorrow. Will you be up for a while?" "A little longer," he confirmed. "I'll be in soon." Alone again on the terrace, Jackson reflected on how dramatically his life had changed. After the dissolution of his marriage to Valerie and the exposure of the conspiracy against him, he had been consumed with rebuilding his company and redefining his purpose. Romance had been the furthest thing from his mind when Naomi proposed a transition from a professional to a personal relationship. "We work well together," she had stated with characteristic directness over dinner at her apartment. "We share values, intellectual compatibility, and mutual respect." There's also clear physical attraction, though we've both been professional about not acting on it. I believe we could build something meaningful together, personally as well as professionally. I'd like to explore that possibility if you're open to it. Her straightforward approach had been refreshing after Valerie's elaborate performances of emotion. With Naomi, what you saw was what you got: brilliant, principled, occasionally abrasive, but always authentic. The relationship had developed slowly and deliberately, both of them bringing careful consideration to each step forward. When Jackson proposed 2 years later, it wasn't with grand romantic gestures, but with a thoughtful discussion of shared vision and commitment. Their children had come later. William when Jackson was 40 and Naomi 38, Elizabeth 3 years after. Parenthood had opened unexpected chambers in Jackson's heart, bringing both profound joy and renewed perspective on his own childhood and his father's failings. The phone in his pocket vibrated. Jackson checked the screen and saw a text from his assistant. Mr. Winter's attorney called again, requesting a meeting. Same response as before. Jackson typed quickly, yes. No interest in any contact. He had maintained this position consistently since receiving the first overture from Gregory's legal team 6 months earlier, as the release date approached. The rain was falling steadily now, the storm moving closer. Jackson finished his bourbon and went inside, securing the terrace doors against the weather. He found his family in the kitchen, where Elizabeth was organizing emergency supplies on the counter while William programmed the backup generator's automatic transfer switch. Naomi supervised while reviewing documents on her tablet. Dad, did you know the last major power outage in this area lasted 4 days? Elizabeth informed him earnestly. I've calculated we have enough supplies for 7 days just to be safe. Jackson smiled at his daughter's thoroughness. Very impressive planning, Lizzie. The evening progressed with the comfortable rhythm of family life. Dinner together at the large kitchen island, a spirited debate about the environmental impact of various energy sources, followed by games as the storm intensified outside. When the power flickered and went out, Elizabeth's delight was palpable as she instantly distributed the emergency lanterns she had prepared. Later, after the children were in bed, Jackson found Naomi in their home office reviewing security footage from their New York office, a habit she had never abandoned despite years of peaceful operations. Anything concerning? He asked, knowing her vigilance stemmed from the events that had brought them together. No, just routine verification, she assured him, closing the laptop. Some habits are hard to break, even when the threats are long past. Jackson nodded, understanding completely. The conspiracy that had nearly destroyed him had permanently altered his approach to trust and security. Even with 15 years of distance, certain protective measures remained ingrained in their lives. I received an interesting email today, Naomi said, changing the subject. From Melissa Harrington. Jackson raised an eyebrow in surprise. Melissa was Valerie's sister, with whom he had maintained minimal contact after the divorce and subsequent criminal proceedings. What did she want? To inform us that Valerie died 3 days ago in prison. Pancreatic cancer, apparently. The funeral is next week. Jackson absorbed this information with an unexpected complexity of emotions. Valerie had been sentenced to life without parole for Anthony Morgan's murder, with additional consecutive sentences for the conspiracy and attempted murder charges related to Jackson. He had not spoken her name in years, had actively worked to excise her from his thoughts. Yet news of her death still registered as a seismic event, the final closure of a painful chapter. Are you all right? Naomi asked, watching his reaction carefully. Yes, Jackson said after a moment. I'm not sure what I'm supposed to feel. Relief? Satisfaction? Grief seems inappropriate given what she did, but she was still someone you once loved, Naomi finished for him. It's natural to have complicated feelings. Jackson nodded, grateful for her understanding. Did Melissa expect us to attend the funeral? No. She specifically said she was informing us as a courtesy, not an invitation. She knows where we stand. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside. Finally, Jackson asked the question that had been forming since he heard the news. Do you think I should meet with Gregory now? After all this time? Naomi considered this thoughtfully. That depends on what you hope to gain from such a meeting. Closure? Understanding? Forgiveness? I'm not sure, Jackson admitted. Maybe just answers to questions I still have after all these years. Why he betrayed our friendship so completely? Whether any of it was ever real? Would those answers change anything for you now? Naomi challenged gently. You've built an extraordinary life and legacy that has nothing to do with him or Valerie. Does looking backwards serve any purpose? It was a fair question, and one Jackson had asked himself repeatedly since learning of Gregory's impending release. The man who had once been his closest friend and then his most dangerous enemy would soon be free after 15 years of incarceration. Did that fact require any response from Jackson? Probably not, he conceded. But there's something unfinished about it all, even after all this time. Naomi nodded, understanding his need for resolution. Sleep on it. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. The following afternoon, Jackson left a board meeting at Mercer Impact Capital's Manhattan headquarters and found Bennett Wade waiting in his office. The private investigator had aged considerably in the past 15 years, but maintained the same sharp intelligence in his eyes. Bennett, Jackson greeted him with genuine warmth. This is an unexpected pleasure. Forgive the intrusion, Bennett replied, rising to shake Jackson's hand. Your assistant mentioned you had a few minutes between meetings, and I was in the building for another matter. What can I do for you? Bennett hesitated before answering. I heard about Valerie's passing, and I know today is Gregory Winter's release date. Given our history, I wanted to check in personally. Jackson gestured for Bennett to sit. I appreciate the thought. It's been a day of reflection. I imagine so. 15 years is a long time, but some wounds leave permanent marks. Jackson studied the older man thoughtfully. Bennett had been instrumental in uncovering the conspiracy against him, but their professional relationship had ended once the legal proceedings were complete. They had maintained occasional contact over the years, primarily through charitable events where their paths crossed. Did you know Gregory try to contact me before his release? Jackson asked. Bennett nodded. I did. His attorney reached out to several people connected to the case, trying to facilitate some kind of reconciliation meeting. Why would he want that after all this time? The investigator shrugged. People face their mortality in prison. Some find religion, others philosophy. Many seek forgiveness or understanding, sometimes genuinely, sometimes as another manipulation. And what's your professional assessment of Gregory's motivations? Jackson asked, genuinely curious about Bennett's perspective. Based on my sources, he spent the last decade on good behavior. Became something of a model prisoner, taught business classes to other inmates, participated in restorative justice programs. His parole hearings suggest significant remorse, though, of course, that could be performative. Jackson considered this information. The Gregory he had known was certainly capable of a convincing performance of contrition if it served his interests. There's something else you should know, Bennett added, his expression grave. Gregory has terminal cancer. Doctors give him less than a year. This was unexpected. How reliable is that information? Very. I have contacts at the federal medical facility where he received treatment. The cancer is advanced and aggressive. His release was partly compassionate due to his condition. Jackson processed this revelation with the same complex emotions he'd experienced upon learning of Valerie's death. So both of them will die within a year of each other, after everything. Life has its own sense of symmetry sometimes, Bennett observed. For what it's worth, I believe his request to meet you may be genuine this time. When people face death, priorities often change dramatically. I'll take that under advisement, Jackson said noncommittally. Thank you for telling me. After Bennett left, Jackson stood at his office window, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The city had changed significantly in 15 years, as had he. The vengeful, wounded man who had meticulously dismantled the conspiracy against him had evolved into someone more measured, more at peace. The company he had transformed was now a force for positive change in communities across the country. His family brought him joy and purpose he had never imagined possible during those dark days. Did he need closure with Gregory to complete his journey? Or would meeting with his former friend simply reopen wounds better left sealed? 3 days later, Jackson sat in a private room at Mount Sinai Hospital, waiting for Gregory Winters to arrive. After considerable reflection and discussion with Naomi, he had decided to grant one meeting, not for Gregory's benefit, but for his own. The door opened, and Jackson barely recognized the man who entered. Gregory Winters had once been athletic and imposing, with an easy confidence that commanded attention. The person before him now was gaunt, frail, his once thick hair reduced to wispy strands. Only his eyes retained their intensity, though they now held more desperation than charm. "Jackson," Gregory said, his voice raspy. "Thank you for coming. I honestly didn't think you would." "Neither did I," Jackson admitted, remaining seated as Gregory lowered himself carefully into a chair opposite him. An oxygen tank accompanied his former friend, tubes running to his nostrils. "I don't have long," Gregory stated plainly. "The doctors say weeks, maybe a couple of months if I'm lucky. Bennett told me. I'm sorry about your diagnosis." Gregory laughed weakly. "Are you? After what I tried to do to you, I would have thought you'd consider this appropriate justice." "I don't wish suffering on anyone," Jackson replied evenly. "Not anymore. That kind of thinking belongs to another lifetime." Gregory studied him with evident curiosity. "You've changed. 15 years will do that." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. Decades of history, both good and terrible, hanging in the air like a physical presence. "I requested this meeting for a reason," Gregory finally said. "Not for forgiveness. I know that's not possible after what I did. But for understanding, maybe, and to give you something I think you deserve to have." He reached for a folder that sat on the table beside him and slid it across to Jackson. "These are letters I wrote over the years in prison. One every year on the anniversary of my arrest. I never intended to give them to you, but now it seems important somehow." Jackson made no move to take the folder. "What do they say?" "The truth. About why I betrayed you. About Valerie. About all of it." Gregory's breathing had become more labored. "I've had 15 years to think about what I did. 15 years to understand my own motivations and weaknesses. It's all there. Why not just tell me now?" Gregory adjusted his oxygen flow slightly before answering. "Because I want you to read it when you're ready, not when I'm sitting across from you wanting absolution I don't deserve. And because it's easier to write some truths than to say them aloud." Jackson finally picked up the folder but didn't open it. "Is that all you wanted from this meeting?" "No." Gregory's hands trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small key. "This opens a safe deposit box at First Republic Bank on Madison Avenue. Box 1473. Inside is evidence of something I did that you don't know about, something from before the conspiracy you uncovered. I need you to access it and decide what to do with the contents." Jackson took the key reluctantly. "What kind of evidence?" "It relates to your father." Gregory coughed violently, taking several moments to recover. Wallace Mercer wasn't just creating a test with that trust fund. He was setting a trap, but not just for Valerie and me. For someone else. Someone he believed was responsible for your mother's death. Jackson felt as if the air had been sucked from the room. "What are you talking about?" "My mother died of a heart condition. That's what everyone believed. What Wallace wanted people to believe. But he suspected otherwise, and he enlisted me to help investigate years before Valerie came into the picture. I found evidence supporting his suspicions, but then..." Gregory trailed off, his expression haunted. "Then what?" Jackson demanded. "Then I did something unforgivable. Something worse than what you already know about. The safe deposit box contains everything. The original investigation files, my subsequent actions, and a full confession. Once you see it, you'll understand why I couldn't tell you before. Why this had to wait until both Wallace and Valerie were gone." Jackson stared at the key in his palm, feeling the weight of Gregory's words. After 15 years of believing he knew the full extent of the betrayal, he was now being told there were deeper, darker secrets still buried. "Why tell me now? Why not take this to your grave?" Gregory's eyes held genuine regret. "Because you deserve the truth, no matter how painful. Because I've spent 15 years trying to become someone who would make that choice. And because it might help you understand your father better. He wasn't who you thought he was. Neither better nor worse, just different. They talked for another 20 minutes, though Gregory's declining health made extended conversation difficult. They didn't discuss the past directly again, focusing instead on neutral topics. Gregory's experience in prison, Jackson's children, the changes in New York City over the past 15 years. As Jackson prepared to leave, Gregory asked one final question. "Did you hear about Valerie?" "Yes. Pancreatic cancer." Gregory nodded sadly. "Fitting in its way. We both die of cancer within months of each other, after planning to spend our lives together on your money." He coughed again, more severely this time. "I visited her in prison last year, you know. We hadn't spoken since the trials. And she hadn't changed. Not really. Still beautiful, still manipulative, still convinced she deserved better than what life gave her. She blamed me for everything going wrong. Said if I hadn't been so greedy, we could have been more careful, more patient." Jackson wasn't surprised. Valerie had never shown remorse during her trial, maintaining that she was the victim of circumstances and manipulation by Gregory and others. "The funny thing is," Gregory continued weakly, "I actually did love her. It wasn't just about the money for me, though that was certainly part of it. But for Valerie, it was always transactional, always about what she could gain." "I know," Jackson said simply. He had eventually come to understand that Valerie was fundamentally incapable of authentic love or loyalty. It had been a painful but necessary realization. "One last thing," Gregory said as Jackson reached the door. "I saw what you've done with Mercer Impact Capital. The affordable housing developments, the educational initiatives. It's impressive work. Important work. Much better than what we were doing in the old days." "Thank you," Jackson replied, unsure how to respond to praise from the man who had once tried to destroy him. "I know it doesn't matter now, but I'm proud of what you've become," Gregory added, his voice barely audible. "The man you are now, he's who I always pretended to be." 2 days later, Jackson sat in a private room at First Republic Bank. The contents of safe deposit box 1473 spread before him. The documents told a story so extraordinary that he had read through them 3 times to ensure he fully understood their implications. According to Gregory's detailed confession and the supporting evidence, Wallace Mercer had suspected for years that Elizabeth Mercer's death was not the result of natural causes, but deliberate poisoning by her doctor, Adrian Collins, who had been secretly embezzling from the charitable foundation Elizabeth managed. When she discovered financial irregularities and planned to investigate, Dr. Collins had administered medications that exacerbated her heart condition, leading to her death. Wallace had enlisted Gregory, then a young lawyer eager to prove himself to Jackson's powerful father, to investigate discreetly. Gregory had indeed found evidence supporting Wallace's suspicions, including altered medical records and suspicious financial transfers. But then Gregory had made a fateful decision. Instead of giving the evidence to Wallace, he had approached Dr. Collins directly and blackmailed him. For years, Gregory had collected payment from Collins in exchange for silence, amassing a small fortune that later helped finance his lifestyle. When Wallace created the trust fund that supposedly tested Valerie and Gregory, he had actually been laying a trap for Collins. The structure of the trust would have eventually exposed the doctor's financial manipulations through a complex series of triggers and audits. Gregory, realizing his own blackmail scheme would be revealed in the process, had worked with Valerie to restructure the trust and eliminate the threat to himself and Collins. The safe deposit box contained not only Gregory's detailed confession, but also the original evidence against Collins. Evidence that would still be actionable despite the passage of time. Jackson sat back, overwhelmed by these revelations. His mother's death, which he had always believed was a tragic but natural event, had apparently been a deliberate act. His father's controlling nature, which Jackson had attributed to emotional limitations, had been fueled partly by grief and suspicion. And Gregory's betrayal had roots far deeper than Jackson had ever imagined. The question now was what to do with this information. Dr. Adrian Collins was still alive, having retired from medical practice years ago to focus on his charitable foundation, which ironically specialized in cardiac care. Exposing him would bring justice for Elizabeth Mercer but would also reopen painfully private family matters and potentially undermine the positive work Collins' foundation had done since. Jackson carefully gathered the documents and secured them in his briefcase. This decision would require careful consideration and conversations with Naomi and Diane, the two people who could help him process these revelations with clarity and wisdom. 1 month later, Jackson stood on the same terrace where our epilogue began, watching another summer storm approach. The air felt heavy with electricity, mirroring his internal state as he prepared for the meeting that would begin in less than an hour. Dr. Adrian Collins had agreed to come to Jackson's home after receiving a letter requesting a private conversation about matters related to Elizabeth Mercer's medical treatment. At 78, Collins was still active in his foundation's work, though he had passed daily operations to his daughter years earlier. Jackson had spent weeks deliberating over his approach, consulting with Naomi, Diane, and Olivia Chun about the legal and ethical implications of the evidence Gregory had preserved. In the end, he had decided against immediate legal action, opting instead for a direct confrontation that would give Collins the opportunity to respond to the accusations before Jackson determined next steps. The helicopter just landed, Naomi informed him, stepping onto the terrace. Luis is bringing Dr. Collins up to the house now. Jackson nodded, straightening his shoulders. Are the children away? Yes, my mother picked them up an hour ago. They'll stay with her tonight as planned. Thank you, Jackson said, taking her hand briefly. For everything. Your clarity has been essential through all of this. Naomi squeezed his hand in return. Whatever happens in this meeting, we'll handle the aftermath together, just as we've handled everything else. They proceeded to Jackson's study, where they greeted Dr. Collins, a thin, distinguished-looking man with alert eyes that belied his age. After initial pleasantries, Jackson came directly to the point, explaining that he had received evidence suggesting Collins' involvement in Elizabeth Mercer's death. He presented selected documents from Gregory's collection, watching Collins' reaction carefully. The doctor's composure cracked almost immediately. Rather than denying the accusations, he seemed almost relieved to finally face them. I've been waiting for this day for 30 years, Collins admitted, his voice trembling. When Wallace Mercer died without confronting me, I thought perhaps I had escaped judgment. But some actions follow you to the grave, don't they? Over the next 2 hours, Collins confessed everything. The embezzlement from Elizabeth's foundation to cover gambling debts, her discovery of the financial discrepancies, his panic and desperate decision to silence her by adjusting her medication to induce a fatal cardiac episode. He explained how Gregory Winters had approached him with evidence shortly after Elizabeth's death, demanding payment for silence. I've lived with this shame every day since, Collins concluded, looking older and more diminished than when he had arrived. The foundation I established was my attempt at atonement, try to save other lives to balance the one I took. It doesn't excuse anything, I know that. I'm prepared to face whatever consequences you deem appropriate, Mr. Mercer. Jackson listened to the confession with remarkable composure, asking clarifying questions but showing no outward signs of the emotional turbulence within. When Collins finished speaking, Jackson was silent for several long moments. Dr. Collins, he finally said, you took my mother from me when I was 14 years old. You robbed my father of the love of his life and set him on a path of suspicion and control that damaged our relationship irreparably. You allowed Gregory Winters to blackmail you for years rather than facing justice for your actions. And you've built a public reputation as a medical humanitarian while carrying this secret. Collins nodded, accepting each statement without protest. I could ensure you spend your remaining years in prison, Jackson continued. The statute of limitations on murder doesn't expire, and the evidence is compelling. Olivia Chun, the U.S. attorney, is a close friend who would personally oversee the prosecution if I asked. I understand, Collins said quietly. However, Jackson added, I've learned over the years that justice and vengeance are not always the same thing. Your foundation has saved lives, thousands of them through early detection and treatment of the very condition that took my mother. That work is important, regardless of its origins in your guilt. Jackson leaned forward, his gaze intense. Here is what will happen. You will sign a complete confession that will be sealed and stored securely. You will immediately transfer control of your foundation to your daughter, removing yourself from all operational and governance roles. You will establish a substantial new endowment for cardiac research in Elizabeth Mercer's name. And you will live with the knowledge that I could destroy you at any moment should I choose to make your confession public. Collins appeared stunned by these terms. You're not turning me over to the authorities? Not at this time, Jackson specified. My mother believed in redemption and in the power of good works to heal wounds. I think she would prefer her legacy to be measured in lives saved rather than in your punishment, however deserved it might be. After Collins departed, having agreed to all conditions, Naomi found Jackson standing alone in his study, looking at a photograph of his mother. Are you satisfied with your decision? She asked, joining him. I'm at peace with it, he replied thoughtfully, which isn't quite the same thing, but it's enough. And Gregory's letters? Did they provide the understanding he claimed they would? Jackson nodded slowly. In their way, yes. He wasn't asking for forgiveness, just for me to understand that the roots of his betrayal went deeper than Valerie or greed. Once he started down the path of blackmailing Collins, each subsequent compromise became easier. By the time he and Valerie conspired against me, his moral compass had been broken for years. Do you think he truly regretted what he did? Naomi asked. I think he regretted who it made him become, Jackson answered after consideration. There's a difference. Gregory Winters died 3 weeks after their hospital meeting, with no funeral at his request. Jackson arranged for a simple marker at the cemetery and attended the interment alone, not out of forgiveness or reconciliation, but an acknowledgement of the complicated human being Gregory had been, capable of both profound betrayal and, ultimately, truth. As another year passed, Jackson found that resolving these last mysteries from his past had freed him to focus even more fully on the future. Mercer Impact Capital continued to expand its positive influence, launching new initiatives in environmental sustainability and healthcare accessibility for underserved communities. The Wallace and Elizabeth Mercer Foundation, now under Diane's capable leadership with input from Jackson, funded arts and music education in public schools across the country, honoring Elizabeth's passion while creating opportunities for children like she had once done. Jackson's children thrived, William showing early interest in environmental engineering, Elizabeth demonstrating remarkable talent in both mathematics and music. Jackson worked consciously to give them the balance he had never experienced in his own childhood. High expectations paired with unconditional love, structure without control, protection without manipulation. On the 15th anniversary of the day Jackson had discovered Valerie and Gregory's betrayal, he and Naomi visited the lake house that had once belonged to Elizabeth Mercer's family. They walked along the shore where Jackson had spent happy summers as a child, before his mother's death had altered the trajectory of his family. Do you ever wonder how differently your life might have turned out if they hadn't betrayed you? Naomi asked as they watched the sunset paint the water in vivid oranges and pinks. Jackson considered the question thoughtfully. Sometimes, but then I remember that their betrayal, as painful as it was, ultimately freed me from relationships built on illusion. It forced me to rebuild my life on a foundation of truth rather than convenience or appearance. And led you to me, Naomi added with a small smile. The best consequence of the worst chapter of my life, Jackson agreed, taking her hand. They stood in companionable silence for a while, watching darkness gradually claim the landscape. Finally, Jackson spoke again, his voice reflective. I've been thinking about those property taxes, the text from Gregory that first alerted me something was wrong. Such a small thing to unravel an entire conspiracy. Small things often reveal the largest truths, Naomi observed. It wasn't really about the taxes. No, Jackson agreed. It was about the nature of the relationship, transactional rather than genuine. I was useful rather than valued. And now? Naomi asked. Jackson looked at his wife, brilliant, direct, uncompromisingly honest, and felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought them together, however painful its beginnings. Now I understand the difference between being valued for what I provide and being valued for who I am, he said simply. And I've built a life where that distinction is clear in every relationship I maintain. As they walked back to the house where their children waited, Jackson reflected that perhaps this was the true meaning of justice. Not punishment or vengeance, but the creation of something better from the ashes of betrayal. The property taxes had been paid, indeed, but the real debt had been settled in the currency of truth, growth, and genuine connection. The conspirators were gone, their plans long thwarted, their lives ended in illness and regret. Yet Jackson had emerged not merely intact, but transformed. His company reimagined as a force for positive change, his family built on authentic love, his understanding of his parents enriched by painful but necessary truths. The storm clouds had finally cleared, revealing stars that had been there all along, waiting to be seen. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.